Morning. For those who don't know me, I am Paul Young. I am the Principal Inspector of the Emergency Response, Marine Operations and Aviation team within the HSE Energy Division. So we're a specialist team of inspectors who deal with those three topics. So, as Alex was just saying, we are getting concerned with the fact that there continue to be a large number of attendant vessel collisions. And when I say large, obviously in comparison to the number of operations that are undertaken offshore, it's a very small percentage, but it's still too many. And we talk about sharing a lot, as Alex was just saying. It was a good question from Craig. I don't think we do share enough. We talk a good game about sharing, but actually, I get to see all of these incidents because there's a legal duty to report them to us. And I'm going to bet that you guys aren't aware of some of the incidents that I'm going to go through, despite the fact that there were some really good learnings from them. Before I go into the details of the incidents, just talk a little bit about the HSE's jurisdiction for marine operations, because ordinarily, of course, this is flag state, the MCA, etc. And there may be some here that are even unaware that HSE has an interest in marine operations. So between us and OPRED deal with environmental issues. We are the competent authority for regulating offshore oil and gas activities and renewables activities. We have a whole suite of legislation that we are authorised to enforce, but the one that you're probably most familiar with is the Health and Safety at Work Act. And that applies to every work activity in the UK. There's another piece of legislation, the Activities Outside Great Britain Order, and that extends the duties of the Health and Safety at Work Act to certain offshore activities that extend beyond the 12-mile limit. So it places the duties of the Health and Safety at Work Act on any offshore installation and any activity on it. And the important thing for us is any activity in connection with an offshore installation or an activity immediately preparatory thereto, whether carried out from the installation or from a vessel. So if you're engaged in an activity in connection with an offshore installation, regardless if it's the vessel or the installation, then depending on the specifics of the activity, it will fall under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And when we talk about connection, we talk about physical connection. We'll talk about anchor handling later on today. Obviously, there's a physical connection. But it's also hazard and risk connection, command and control connection, any kind of connection where the act of one could impact the health and safety of the other parties. So very, very quickly, again, most people are aware of this. The Health and Safety at Work Act is an act, so it's very broad in its description and its definitions. There's about 80-odd sections to it, even more, but the two sections you'll hear most about are sections 2 and section 3. And these basically say that if you're an employer, you need to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health and safety of your employees. And section 3 says, if you undertake a work activity, you need to conduct it in such a way as to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the safety of people who are not your employees, but people that may be affected by what you're doing. So this would be, in the case of an oil company, you need to have arrangements in place to protect the crew of the vessel. If you're a vessel operator, you need to do things in such a way as to not pose a risk to the people on the installation. And if it's an onshore activity, for example, that extends to protecting members of the public. There's another piece of legislation that's kind of relevant to what we're talking about here. This is the Offshore Installations and Pipelines Works Management and Admin Regs. We just call it MAR. Reg 8 talks about cooperation. And this says that every person shall cooperate with the installation manager or any other person on whom any duty is placed by these regulations so far as is necessary to enable him to comply with the relevant statutory provisions. Relevant statutory provisions refers back to the Act and any other legislation that would apply. So that basically means that if an oil company puts in place processes and procedures for the control and monitoring of vessels in and around their offshore installations, then there's a legal duty for vessel operators to comply with that. There's a third part to it, which says that it's without prejudice to the duty owned by the master. So the OAM or the Marine TA or whoever it is that has the legal duty, they can impose measures to reduce risk, and the vessel operator would have to comply with them, but they can't ask the vessel to do anything that's going to endanger the vessel. So the master still has the authority to say they don't want to engage in a particular activity. So, and we'll talk a little bit at the end about this, but you can see that our legislation that we use is much different to a lot of the maritime legislation, particularly things like the collision regulations. They're much more prescriptive. So when we look at incidents, it's very easy to say, and when we go through them, you'll see some examples. It's very easy to say that, or the watchkeeper didn't keep a proper lookout, Rule 5. So it's the watchkeeper's fault. Or they didn't maintain a safe speed. So there's the breach. Our legislation talks about doing things so far as is reasonably practicable. So it's all about identifying all those barriers that Alex was talking about and implementing every single one of them up until the point where it's no longer reasonably practicable to do so. Having a competent watchkeeper, that's a huge barrier. It's a very important and significant thing to try to reduce risks at offshore installations. But it's not the only thing that can be done. And Alex, when they've dove a bit deeper into their investigation, they started to identify all these other barriers that we speak about. So that's the legal duty on you guys, is to make sure that those the barriers that get identified are applied to your operation unless you can demonstrate it's not reasonably practicable. So I'm going to start from the bottom of this slide and read up. The purpose of sharing this, the reason I've put together this slide is because it is that sharing piece. I see all these and you don't, and we should be learning from every one of them. I can't go into specific details, it's all very high level, but I'm hoping that this will promote some thoughts and discussion on are we doing enough? Over recent years, at least for the past 7 or 8 years, there's been a massive improvement in how we conduct operations at oil and gas platforms. And this stemmed from a couple of high-profile collisions. But the emphasis has always been on what's the installation operator doing. And we've got much more in-depth checklists. We've got training for people on the offshore installations. We've got speed limits within the 500-meter zones. All of these good barriers that we have in place. But the events are still occurring. So what we're looking at now is, okay, what can we be doing on the vessels to try to further reduce the possibility of these things happening? So hopefully this will prompt some of that discussion. Some of these cases were quite significant, and they resulted in some significant damage, and in a couple of cases, partial evacuation of the installations. Others were much more minor damage. The legal requirement to report these incidents to us is any damage if there's a collision between a vessel and an installation, any damage. If you just take a bit of paint off, that's damage. It needs to be reported. You also need to report any near misses with the potential for significant damage. So we're going to, and there's a couple of examples in here of near misses as well. When I go through it, I'm not going to make any comment on or judgment on the cause or any fault, and I would ask you as well when we go through it not to consider the fault. As I've said, it's very easy at first glance to say this is the watchkeeper's fault and that's about it. There's always more to it than that. I'm not going to go into any details on any enforcement action that we've taken, and I've anonymized everything, so you won't know. You might be aware, you might have been involved in some of the incidents, you might have been aware because some of these there were safety alerts produced. Unfortunately, it does make for a slightly boring slide pack, but we just have to live with that. So, to get into them. So case 1, we've got a PSV requested to enter the founder meter zone of a fixed installation. 2 people on the bridge, chief officer and the watchkeeping officer. Pre-entry check is completed, and the chief officer begins moving towards the founder meter zone, everything as should be. However, the chief officer allows the speed of the vessel to increase, not deliberately of course, above the normal rate, and by the time the chief officer has realised that he's approaching far too quickly, he's closed the distance significantly, tries to react. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do so, and it was when he was trying to regain control that he struck the leg of the installation. Case 2 is a wind farm vessel, an SOV, transiting through the wind farm. So they were doing about 8 knots. They were just going to go and pick up some work parties that have been working on some of the turbines. Weather's good, daylight. The vessel's in DP mode, which is normal for when they're in the wind farm. And you've got an officer to watch and a DPO on the bridge. DPO has control of the vessel, and he's just changing course just to pass at a safe distance around a turbine. And the second person on the bridge was engaged in some administrative task. The DPO made a mistake. The vessel, the alteration was too large, and he finds himself now on a collision course with a wind turbine. The master just fortunately had stepped onto the bridge for an unrelated reason, sees what's going on, tries to take control of the vessel, but was unable to prevent collision with the wind turbine. Fortunately, there was nobody on that turbine. Case number 3 is a multi-role ERV standing by outside the 400 meter zone of a jack-up drilling rig. Master's handed over to the officer to watch. It's midnight, weather's good, there was a lookout on the bridge. The officer to watch becomes engaged in non-navigational tasks. The lookout asks if they can also use the computer and was given permission to do so. They both think they're a safe distance from the installation and they're slowly moving away. But what they failed to notice was that weather conditions had changed, wind direction had changed, and now the vessel is drifting towards the installation. PSV was alongside, it was working cargo. They saw what was happening, they saw this vessel entering the 500, tried to raise the alert. The control room tried to call the ERV, too late, and it strikes the legs of the jack-up. Case number 4, PSV is waiting on weather in the vicinity of an installation. I'll skip through this one pretty rapidly because you've just heard a bit about it. But yeah, PSV is approximately 2 miles downwind of the installation. It's dark. There's one watchkeeper on the bridge. The master requests the AOW to close the distance. They just felt that they were standing by a little bit too far away, and the master sets thrust to start moving towards the installation and then leaves the bridge. The officer to watch fell ill, becomes incapacitated, and goes to the bathroom on the bridge. By the time they re-emerge, the distance is closed considerably. The watchkeeper tries to maneuver away, but there was not enough time, and they strike the leg of the installation. The ruse did detect the vessel, but due to technical issues, didn't receive the alert in time, and the BINWAS had been switched off. Case 5, PSV, standing by a jack-up drilling installation. It's daytime, weather's good, single watchkeeper. The vessel is configured in green DP. So the DPs can controlling some elements of movement, but not others. The officer of the watch begins some administrative tasks on the bridge, but is aware that he needs to avoid colliding with the installation, with the jack-up. He positions the bow of the vessel so we can see the jack-up out of out the front window. And he feels that as long as he can see it, he knows he's not going to collide with it. Unfortunately for him, environmental conditions change. The vessel starts to drift sideways. He can still see the jack-up, but what he's unaware of is there's a fixed installation just a kilometre or two away, and during that period of time, they've drifted across that distance. And the officer to watch, he first saw it when the jacket appeared either side of the toilet block. So by that point, they were very close. Tries to manoeuvre away, but not enough time, and drifts inside the 500 metre zone and collides with the leg of the installation. The OAM, the OAM knew about it was when they felt the impact. Case 6 or case 5, depending on which part you look at there. PSV was engaged in cargo operations alongside a mobile driller. Stark, weather conditions are marginal. The vessel was in the drift-on position. It's got its bow into the wind, and the DP system is managing to hold position. Master was in control. Watchkeeping officer was on the bridge supporting the master. The crane op asks if they can change the heading. He wants to get to a bit of cargo that's a bit further up the deck. The master pulls away a short distance, makes a 30-degree heading change, and of course now the wind is acting not just on the bow but on the beam to a degree. The DP system can't cope, and the vessel drifts onto the installation. Case number 7, PSV engaged in cargo operations alongside weather veining FPSO. 2 DPOs on the bridge, weather's good. The DP system is set to follow target mode, so it's effectively tracking and mirroring the movements of the FPSO to maintain a safe distance. The DP system alerts the DPOs that it's close to heading deviation, and this prompts the SDPO to, I say it prompts, at the same time as the alarm went off, the SDPO notices that the distance between the quarter of his vessel and the hull of the FPSO are closing. Decides to make a heading change just to bring the stern away from the FPSO. The DP system rejects it. Gets concerned that the distance is still closing, tries to take control in DP joystick. The DP system rejected that, and the FPSO drifts onto the PSV. When we looked at this one, the initial cause that had been reported to us was a DP failure. But actually, when we looked at it, the DP system behaved exactly how it was designed to behave. They'd selected follow target, and then the DPO tried to input a conflicting command. He tried to change the heading, he tried to change the position, but the DP system said, well, actually, I can't track the target and also change heading and change position, so you're asking me to do 2 completely different things. So it rejected the second commands that he'd put in. And it was a very simple thing. All he had to do was deselect follow target, and then he could have input whatever he wanted to input. And we eventually found this actually written in the DP manual, but it was buried deep in the manual, and it wasn't a huge amount of detail, but it was there. This one's another weather veining FPSO, a PSV, weather's good. Master and Chief Officer they'd been operating at this FPSO for a day or 2, and throughout the whole period, they were having difficulty trying to maintain the distance between the FPSO, as the FPSO gently swang in the wind and the weather, they were struggling to maintain this uniform distance. Neither had worked very often at weather-veiling FPSOs. They worked mainly at fixed installations. And neither were aware that the system had a follow target mode, so they just weren't using it. So instead, what they were doing was every time the FPSO swang, they just changed the position they entered the new set point and just changed the position of the vessel. And they were doing this constantly. They had two DGPS and one relative position reference system. And of course, every time the FPSO is moving and the distance is changing, the relative system thinks that means that the PSV is moving. And it couldn't, but of course, the two DGPSs aren't showing any movement of the PSV, so what happens is the relative reference kept dropping out. And this is what was causing some consternation to the master and the chief officer, and it was a frustration to them, but they felt relatively safe to continue. The master was aware that according to the ASOG, this put him into the blue advisory column, but conducted the dynamic risk assessment and felt that they could continue on. Soon after that, they lost one of the DGPS, and due to the way the system is designed, the vessel tried to get to the one position that it was sure of, which was the one remaining DGPS, which resulted in it thrusting towards the FPSO and then making contact. So with regard to the advisory column of the ASOG, unlike other DP guidance, in the PSV, in the IMCA PSV guidance, it does say in there that if you find yourself in the blue advisory column of the ASOG, you have to take some action to rectify the issue. It may be that you don't need to stop the operation, but you need to do something. Simply ignoring it or saying that you've performed a dynamic risk assessment, it isn't taking action. So in this case, obviously they should have stopped the operation, but continued on. Case number 9, the final one. So we've got a multi-role ERV now standing by an offshore installation, distance about 750 meters. They weren't planning to work cargo, they weren't planning to, obviously, to do any of their ERV duties, it's just standing by, weather's good, but the vessel was positioned upwind of the installation and it was operating on one of 4 engines. Again, fairly normal, save fuel, save emissions. One of the engineers erroneously stopped the engine, resulting in the vessel blackout. I can mention this one because there was a safety alert produced about this one, and it was very, very unfortunate. But the engineer went down to look at the generator and shine his torch on it and look at whatever engineers look at when they're looking at generators. And unfortunately, the emergency stop button, the plastic cover to prevent accidental pressing, had been dislodged months or years before, and he just happened to lean up against the emergency stop and black the ship out. Unfortunately, it means now that the ERV is drifting towards the installation. They managed to stop it by dropping an anchor, but they got to within about 150 meters. The concern for us here was that when the operator did some calculations of using the speed and displacement of the vessel against the structural integrity of the installation, they found that had it have struck, there was a potential for a complete structural collapse of the installation. So I've listed some common factors. By no means are these all of the common factors, but bridge resource management plays a part, distraction, loss of situational awareness, lack of understanding of the correct operation of the DP system, lack of appreciation of environmental conditions. I guess, though, when we drill into some of these, distraction, loss of situational awareness, for example, what we find is that, yes, on some occasions, the officer to watch or the lookout has made a decision to go and do something else. But in many cases, it's because they think that it's part of their duties to keep on top of the admin or to check the radios or whatever it is they need to do some planned maintenance tasks, So we can't have it both ways. We can't be saying to watchkeepers, you need to keep a proper lookout, you need to operate the vessel in a safe manner, but at the same time say to them, we also expect you to be doing these additional tasks. It's one or the other. And if you do need to do them, if you do need watchkeepers to do additional tasks, then you need to look at, well, actually, how do we control it in these circumstances? How do we make it so that they can perform these tasks, but also they don't fail in their primary mission, which is to operate the vessel in a safe manner? I've put down here all of these involved. So I take statements from all of these watchkeepers when we investigate these incidents. And I have the utmost sympathy for them because they all come across as professional and competent. And had I spoken to them the day before the incident, I'm sure they would have assured me that this wouldn't happen to them. And yet, through things that are fairly minor in nature, just checking the computer or deciding that I'll send the lookout down and they can have a cup of tea, or any of these little things, then goes on to lead into a much more significant event. And all of them are invariably shaking their heads and wondering, how the hell did I let that happen? But I look back at my time at sea, and I did this. I know there were times when I was distracted. I know there was times when I was engaged in something else, chart corrections or sending an email or whatever it might be. And I got away with it because we were in the middle of the ocean, or because there was no traffic around, or because I noticed, I just had something prompted me to look up in time. But it's just luck, a lot of it, that these guys found themselves in this situation and ended up having a collision. So I have sympathy, and in many cases, when we speak to the operators, the first reaction is the watchkeepers, it's his fault, or it's their fault. But actually, when we drill into it, we find that there's more to it. Alex made the point about we've kind of set these people up to fail in many occasions. Because we are, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have the DP system, the computer, when the operator tried to tell it to do one thing, and then tried to give it another command to do something that was contradictory to the first command, the computer said, no, I'm not going to do it. Just rejected that out of hand and said, I'm not going to do it. But we do the same thing with human beings. We say, keep a proper lookout, but also keep on top of your admin. But as human beings, we don't say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to keep a proper lookout. We want to help. We want to be, we want to do all the jobs that we're asked to do. So it's how do we go about reducing the either the necessity or the temptation to be doing additional tasks on the bridge, for example, when you don't need to be doing them. So produced a safety alert. I'm hoping you've seen it. It did gain some traction because just a week after we had that terrible collision in the Humber. There was some thoughts as to whether we'd preempted that and produced this in advance of the event. But no, this only deals with oil and gas and renewable operations. This contains a lot more. This contains some considerations, some recommendations that I think that everyone should be considering. It addresses some of the things that Alex has already been talking about. It addresses the fact that there are new technologies available to alert us of potential collisions. I'm going to give you an example of that. I was on a crew transfer vessel just a couple of months ago. Now, some of you may have seen it's a bit of YouTube, a video on YouTube, and it shows it's a camera on the wheelhouse of the crew transfer vessel, and it's racing through a wind farm in the German sector, and the watchkeeper is looking down to his right-hand side and fails to notice this turbine, rapidly approaching this turbine, and they smash into it and bodies fly everywhere. Well, I was on that same CTV. They've patched it up and it still operates now there. But I tell you what, the amount of technology that they have now to prevent that thing hitting a turbine is bonkers. When we approached it, I was sat in the wheelhouse, and as we approached, we got this automated female voice saying, "You're approaching turbine Golf 2," or whatever it might have been. Every time it gets within 50 meters, you get this voice saying, "We're approaching the turbine." So my question is, why can't we have that on a PSV if we're approaching the 500 meter zone? It's just AIS, it's just programming, it's just based on the same technology as EGDIS. So there's little things like this we can learn from different industries, we can take them across. The stuff renewables can learn about from oil and gas as well. And we should all be learning from each other. My concern is that we're not necessarily, but I would encourage everyone to have a look at the safety alert, have a look at the recommendations, consider other stuff you can be doing. Because remember, as I said earlier, it's all about reasonable practicability. It's all about doing everything you can do, regardless of how big or how small it is, up until the point where it's no longer reasonably practical to do it. That's me, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? One there. Thanks, Paul. I personally always find it insightful.
One question, Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mark Kilson, Ultramarine. Just an observation, case 7, and thanks for sharing. I think a lot of people in the room will take a lot from that. Kind of on the tone you were heading towards the end there around computer interaction, learnings. You said in case 7 the the vessel tracking was applied, and he went to do 2 functions, and the DP system ignored those functions. Just wondering, was the software changed to then give him a warning to explain why those functions weren't accepted? And then, therefore, the individual would know, takes out the risk of an individual not understanding how the DP system works and then taking it from there. And I think, if that's the case, can that be applied to the companies that sell vessel alignance systems, all those factors, taking feedback from the people operating them and the lessons learned?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, the answer is, I don't know actually but I was thinking exactly the same thing when I was driving in this morning and I was kind of going through these in my head. I was thinking if there'd just been a one line came up that said very briefly why it was he couldn't take control, then he would have known. If it just said, a one line came up and said deselect, follow track mode, he would have known, deselect and then taken control. So you're absolutely right, and the answer is I don't know, and I don't think that there was any changes, but it's a very good point. It's so simple, and also it's a bit like the initial alarm that came up, approaching heading deviation. Okay, we kind of understand what that's trying to say, but it doesn't really explain the situation that's developing. So all these little things just to make it much easier for a human being to understand very quickly what's going on, and then take the right course of action. So yeah, and that would be another good learning.
One over here.
Hi Paul, it's Craig Wiggins, Fusion Safety. So great presentation, thank you for sharing that with us. Obviously my experience is in the topside oil and gas part. And obviously we're going to talk about human factors later on, which Alex will talk about that. But what is the regulators done to promote human performance assessments on the bridge of ships?
Yes, so we did introduce into GOMO just a couple of years ago, the last update to whatever the chapter was. We introduced more stuff on bridge resource management, distractions, and various other kind of human factors related things. I don't know if it got the attention that it should have got. So I came from initially oil and gas, but I moved deep sea and then was on cruise ships. So there was a huge amount of bridge resource management that we had to go through, so it's kind of second nature. It's just But I found that when I was looking at oil and gas, there was much less emphasis on that element. And in fact, one of the incidents we talked about there, the initial, when it was reported to us and we said we're going to investigate it, the shipping company said, human error, we've already investigated, human error. And it just so happened I had a human factors specialist sat pretty close to me when I was in the office, and he took an interest, and he joined me in the investigation. And suddenly he was able to identify a huge number of things that they could do. And he explained this to the vessel operator. They sent someone away to learn about human factors, and suddenly it was like a whole new world had opened up to them. And they became really, really engaged then in human factors. What else can we be doing? And so there was a massive, but they learned the hard way because they had experienced the collision. I extend this out to, I've mentioned it a few times before, but that particular human factors specialist, he has said, look, if you want me to talk to industry about some of the things that need to be considered, some tools they can use, or anything in general that's related to human factors, he's more than happy to have that discussion. So if we set that up with the MSF or whatever it happens to be, then and maybe start prompting a bit more of that conversation, because there's definitely less emphasis in the marine world than there is in the oil and gas world.